The bed sheets were wrinkled, freshly wrinkled. A pair of heels I didn't own lay tipped over by the closet. The mirror was fogged, but no one had showered. Then I saw it. Lipstick. Not mine. I dropped my suitcase. The thud echoed louder than my heartbeat. Voice downstairs. His laugh. Her laugh. I froze. I hadn't told anyone I was coming back early. I stepped forward, then stopped cold. The bedroom door creaked open from the inside. A shadow moved past my wedding photo. I only left for one weekend. So why does my home feel like someone else's life now? If you want to know what happens next, stay with me until the end of the video. And if you still believe deep in your heart that God is always watching over you, silently arranging everything, then right now, leave a comment saying Amen below this video. Because who knows, at the very moment you write those words, a blessing may quietly enter your life. I never thought I would be telling a story like this at my age. At 65, after raising a family, working my years as a teacher, and building a quiet life with my husband, I believed the storms of marriage had passed. I thought that the years ahead would be filled with peaceful mornings in my rose garden, evenings at the church hall, and Sunday dinners with my son when he came back to visit. But life has a way of humbling us. It teaches us that betrayal can strike even in the twilight years, when you least expect it, when you think you are safe. My name is Evelyn Carter, though most people around town call me Evie. I have lived in Davenport, Iowa, nearly my entire life. It is not a big place. Folks here still wave when they drive by, and news spreads quicker than the autumn wind across the fields. For most of my years, I have been proud to call this town my home. I know the faces at the grocery store, the hymns at the Methodist church, the taste of fresh apple pie at the local diner. This place has been the backdrop of my life, my joys, and my heartbreaks. Walter, my husband of over 4 decades, was a man everyone respected. He worked at the auto shop for years, fixing tractors and cars for half the county. People would greet him with a smile, call him dependable, and for most of my life, I believed that too. We met when I was just 19, married when I was 22. Together, we built a life, raised our son Daniel, and weathered all the storms that came our way. Or so, I thought. This past year had been different. I noticed little things first, the kind you brush aside when you trust someone deeply. Walter grew restless. He spent more time away from home, saying he was meeting old friends, running errands, or helping out down at the VFW hall. He carried himself differently, almost with a spring in his step, the kind I hadn't seen since our younger years. I wanted to believe it was just him enjoying retirement, but a quiet ache started to settle in my chest. It wasn't just Walter who had changed. My old friend Lorraine had been visiting more often. Lorraine and I had known each other since high school. She was the kind of woman who turned heads, even now in her mid-60s. She dressed sharp, wore perfume too strong for my taste, and had a laugh that filled a room. We had grown apart over the years, mostly because she had gone through a bitter divorce and carried a heaviness I sometimes struggled to be around. Still, I welcomed her when she stopped by, poured her coffee, and asked about her life. I never once suspected that she was stepping across the line that separates friendship from betrayal. Looking back, the signs were all there. A slip of a smile between them when they thought I wasn't looking. A lingering touch when Lorraine handed Walter a dish at the table. I scolded myself for being paranoid, for thinking like a jealous schoolgirl. At my age, I thought those kinds of suspicions had no place in a marriage built on decades of trust. But then came that afternoon in October. The sky was gray, leaves scattered across the porch, and I had returned early from the church meeting because the service had been canceled. I remember carrying a pie dish in one hand, humming to myself as I walked up the steps. When I opened the door, the house was unusually quiet. I called out Walter's name, expecting him to be in the den watching television. No answer. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step creaking beneath my feet. And then, as I pushed open the bedroom door, my world crumbled in a single breath. There they were, Walter and Lorraine, in my bed. Our bed. The bed where we had shared our entire married life. The image burned into me, sharp and undeniable. Walter's face went pale. Lorraine gasped, clutching at the sheet. For a moment, time stopped. I can still hear the blood pounding in my ears, the sound of my heart breaking louder than any scream. I dropped the dish, and it shattered across the hardwood floor, scattering glass and pie like pieces of my life. Walter stumbled for words. Lorraine stammered an apology, but I could not hear them. My legs gave way, and I gripped the doorframe just to keep myself standing. That was the moment I understood something that people rarely say out loud. Betrayal does not soften with age. It cuts just as deep, maybe even deeper, because it comes after years of sacrifice, after building a life on trust that suddenly means nothing. I walked out that day, not because I was weak, but because I needed to breathe. I needed the air, the open sky, something that wasn't heavy with lies. My neighbor Agnes found me sitting on the porch steps, trembling like a child. She wrapped her arm around me, and I let the tears come. For the first time in many years, I felt completely unmoored. That day changed everything. I was no longer just a wife, no longer just Evelyn Carter, the retired teacher who baked pies and sang hymns. I had become a woman betrayed in the winter of her life, and I knew the path ahead would not be easy. But one thing stirred deep inside me, a whisper I hadn't heard in years. It said, "Evie, you are stronger than this." And so, this is where my story begins. The days after that October afternoon passed like a fog. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the lace curtains dancing in the autumn wind, unable to move. There was a plate of untouched toast in front of me for 2 hours. The house that had once been full of warmth now felt like a stranger's home. Everything, every drawer, every photo on the wall, every quiet corner carried the weight of a lie. Walter tried to speak to me the next morning. He stood in the hallway, clutching his coffee like it could somehow ground him. I didn't look at him. I couldn't. His voice trembled as he said my name, Evie, but I walked past him as if he were nothing more than an old memory. The silence between us grew louder with each passing hour. He didn't try again that day. By the third day, Daniel called. I must have sounded strange on the phone because he arrived the next afternoon, driving all the way from Cedar Rapids without even changing out of his work clothes. He walked through the door, took one look at me sitting silently in the living room, and dropped his bag. "Mom?" he asked, gently, kneeling down in front of me. "What happened?" I didn't answer right away. I looked at my son's face so much like Walter's when he was young, and my throat tightened. I wanted to protect Daniel, even now. That's what mothers do. We carry the burden so our children don't have to. But the truth clawed at me. It needed air. I told him everything. Every word felt like a betrayal of the life I had protected for so long, but it was not my betrayal to hide. I watched as Daniel's face darkened, his jaw clenched, his hands turned to fists in his lap. "He did what?" he said in disbelief. With Aunt Lorraine?" He had always called her Aunt Lorraine. She had held him as a baby, bought him ice cream, sat in the front pew at his high school graduation. And now, she had stolen something from his mother that could never be returned. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said, his voice breaking. "I can't believe it." I reached out, placing my hand over his. "Neither can I." That night, Daniel stayed with me. He made dinner, just grilled cheese and tomato soup, the kind he used to request when he was a little boy. We didn't say much, but his presence grounded me. I hadn't realized how much I needed someone to just sit beside me without asking for explanations or forgiveness. The next morning, Daniel confronted Walter. I stayed in the kitchen while they spoke on the porch. I couldn't hear every word, but I saw the way Daniel stood tall, his finger pointing, his voice rising. Walter barely spoke. His shoulders slumped like an old coat hanging off a hook, like the weight of his guilt was finally pressing down on him. Daniel didn't stay long after that. He had a family of his own, a job, a life. But before he left, he hugged me tighter than he had in years. "Don't let him make you small, Mom," he whispered. "You deserve more than this." After he left, the house was silent again. But it was a different kind of silence, not one of shock or despair, but the kind that comes just before a storm. I started to remember things. Not just the betrayal, but the years before it. The times I stayed up late sewing Halloween costumes, the nights I held Walter's hand at the hospital when his brother died, the anniversary dinners I planned, the sacrifices I made. A marriage, especially one that spans decades, is not just about love. It's about choosing each other, again and again. And now, Walter had chosen someone else. I went through our photo albums, page after page of smiles, barbecues, holidays, birthdays. It was all still there, proof of a life we had shared. But now, every image felt tainted, like someone had drawn a crack down the middle of each memory. I began to question everything. Had he always been capable of this? Did he ever truly love me? Had I been blind for 40 years? The questions gnawed at me in the quiet hours, especially at night. I stopped sleeping in our bedroom. I moved into the guest room, the one we had painted blue for Daniel when he was a boy. I couldn't bring myself to change the sheets on the bed where it happened. Let it rot. Let it carry the weight of their shame. Agnes came by a few times. She didn't press for details. She just sat with me, sometimes bringing muffins, sometimes a puzzle book, like old friends do when words feel too heavy. One morning, as we sipped tea on the porch, she looked at me with that firm, no-nonsense expression she had always worn. "You have every right to leave him, you know," she said. I nodded, but my voice was low. "But we've been married 43 years, Agnes. That's most of my life." "So what?" she said. "That doesn't mean you owe him your dignity." Her words stayed with me. Dignity. I hadn't thought about that word in a long time. I'd spent so much of my life trying to be kind, to be patient, to be the good wife, the steady one. But maybe it was time to be something else. Maybe it was time to be honest with myself. One night, I sat down at the kitchen table with a notebook. I began to write. Not a letter to Walter, he didn't deserve that yet, but a letter to myself. I wrote down who I had been, who I was, and who I might still become. It was the first time in years I had spoken to myself with gentleness and truth. "I am not a woman who is easy to forget," I wrote. "I am not the shadow of someone else's mistakes. I am the sum of every kind act, every sleepless night, every quiet strength I have ever offered." And as I closed the notebook, I realized something. The pain would not go away quickly, but neither would I. It took me 3 weeks to gather the strength to see her. I'd thought about it 100 different ways. What I'd say, what she might say, how I'd react. There were days when I pictured myself yelling, slamming doors, throwing every ugly truth back in her face. And then there were days I imagined I'd just cry in front of her, too tired for rage, too hollow for words. But when the time came, I didn't feel any of those things. I felt clear. The opportunity came quietly. A friend from church mentioned that Lorraine had been helping out at the community center thrift store every Thursday morning, the same thrift store where I'd donated a box of Walter's old fishing gear just a year ago, before everything turned to ash. I hadn't been there since. But that Thursday, I woke up early. I dressed carefully. Nothing flashy. Just a soft green cardigan Daniel had gifted me last Christmas and the pearl earrings I'd worn at our 40th wedding anniversary. Not because I wanted to impress her, but because I needed to feel like myself again. The walk to the community center was cool and crisp. Leaves crunched underfoot, and the wind tugged at the corners of my scarf like a child seeking attention. I paused outside the double-glass doors, took one long breath, and stepped inside. The place looked the same, faded posters on the bulletin board, rows of old books, shelves cluttered with knickknacks and second-hand mugs. I spotted her near the back, arranging winter coats on a rack. Lorraine hadn't seen me yet. She was humming something under her breath, swaying slightly as she worked. For a moment, I was thrown back 20 years to a kitchen full of laughter, coffee cups, and her perfume hanging in the air like a promise. She had once braided my hair before my wedding anniversary. She had held my hand when my mother passed. She had been my friend. I walked toward her, slowly. She turned when she heard my footsteps. The color drained from her face. Evie. I stopped a few feet away from her. "Lorraine." End of calm. She looked around, like she might find an escape in the coat racks or the old lamp aisle. But there was nowhere to go. I didn't expect. "I'm sure you didn't," I said, my voice steady. "But I think it's time we stop pretending that silence can fix what's been broken." She swallowed hard, her hands twisting around the hanger of a brown parka. I never wanted to hurt you, but you did." I took another step forward. And not just once. Oh. Tears welled in her eyes. But I didn't move to comfort her. I couldn't. "Do you know what haunts me most?" I said. "It's not the image of you and Walter in my bed. As awful as that was, it's the moments before, the years before. All those afternoons we had coffee in my kitchen while you smiled at me like nothing was wrong. while you held my hand and told me I was lucky to have him. I didn't plan for it to happen, she whispered. I was lonely. He was too. God, Evie, we were just weak. Weak? I repeated. The word felt bitter on my tongue. We were all lonely, Lorraine. You think I haven't felt the silence in my own house? You think I don't know what aging feels like, the invisibility, the ache, the longing for something to spark again. But I didn't steal someone else's flame to light my own. She looked down, ashamed. I took a deep breath. I'm not here for an apology. I don't even think you know how to give a real one. I came because I needed to say this out loud. I needed you to hear that I see you not the version you show the church ladies or the one who makes jokes at the potluck. I see the woman who betrayed a friend of 40 years for a man she can't even trust. I loved him, she said, barely audible. My heart clenched, not because it hurt, but because it didn't. Not anymore. Then you can have him, I said. Every bitter morning, every ache in his back, every silence at the dinner table. You can carry the weight of him now. She looked up at me, stunned. I leaned in just a little, but I want you to know something. You didn't take everything from me. You didn't break me. I never meant to. No, I said firmly, cutting her off. You never meant to be caught. A long silence followed. Then I turned and walked away. It wasn't triumphant. There was no applause, no grand music rising in the background, but it felt like shedding an old skin, stepping into the cold with nothing left to hide. For the first time in weeks, I breathed without choking. When I got home, I made myself tea. I sat by the window and watched a squirrel chase its own tail in the yard, round and round, like it had forgotten why it started. That evening, Walter came home late. We still lived in the same house, for now. It was complicated. Dividing 43 years isn't as easy as splitting a pie. There were bills, pensions, the dog to consider. And besides, I hadn't decided yet. Not fully. He looked at me as he set his keys on the counter. You went out today, he said, surprised. I did. His gaze lingered on me, unsure. Did you see her? I nodded. And? She knows, I said simply. He looked down. I'm sorry. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't hear him, but because I wasn't sure what he was sorry for. For the affair? For being caught? For not choosing me? I went upstairs without another word. That night, I slept in my room for the first time since it happened. I changed the sheets, opened the window, and let the October air wash over the space. It was my room now. Mine. And in that bed, I cried not for Walter, not for Lorraine, but for the years I gave to people who couldn't hold them gently. But I also smiled, just a little, because I knew something they didn't. I was still here. I was still standing. And I wasn't finished yet. There's something strange about silence after confrontation. It doesn't roar like you expect it to. It doesn't slam doors or echo off the walls. It just lingers, like the stillness after a storm, when everything feels both wrecked and calm. The morning after I saw Lorraine, I woke up before the sun. I sat on the edge of the bed in the guest room, the one that still smelled faintly of lavender from an old sachet in the drawer. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like hiding. I didn't feel like shrinking. I felt tired, yes, but also strangely light, as if some invisible weight had shifted, just slightly, off my chest. I made myself a real breakfast for once: eggs, toast, a few slices of apple. I ate slowly, watching the orange light spill across the kitchen floor. The house felt the same, but I didn't. Something in me had turned, like a lock clicking open. After breakfast, I took out my gardening gloves. My rose bushes had been neglected since early October. The petals were dry, browned at the edges, their once vibrant reds and pinks dulled by the cold. I knelt in the dirt and began pruning them gently, whispering to them like I used to when no one was around. Sorry I left you like this, I murmured, brushing off dead leaves. We're going to start over, you and me. There was something deeply healing about tending to something that had also been forgotten. My hands moved with a rhythm they remembered well. Clip, clear, breathe. I worked for hours, lost in the soil, the roots, the promise of new growth. Later that day, I walked into town. It wasn't something I'd done in a while, at least not without Walter. We used to go together, mostly out of habit. The grocery store, the post office, maybe a quick stop at the diner for pie and coffee. But this time, I walked alone. My coat buttoned tight, scarf tucked around my neck, hands deep in my pockets. People noticed me. They always do in small towns. Some looked away quickly, uncomfortable. Others gave me tight, sympathetic smiles. One woman, someone from the church choir whose name I always forgot, reached out to squeeze my hand briefly as we passed each other on the sidewalk. She didn't say anything, but the gesture said enough. I heard, and I'm sorry. At first, it stung. But then, as I kept walking, I realized something important. I had survived the worst part. I had seen them. I had heard their excuses. I had faced the whispers. And I was still walking. I stopped into the bookstore near the square. Small, dusty, filled with more personality than profit. The kind of place where the owner, Judith, always has a kettle of tea brewing in the back and a stack of poetry books by the register. She looked up when I entered and smiled. Well, Evelyn Carter, she said. It's been a minute. I smiled back. It has. I just got in a new collection of Mary Oliver. Thought of you. Mary Oliver. God, how long had it been since I'd read poetry? Since I'd sat in a quiet corner and let words mend me? Judith poured me a cup of chamomile, and we sat in the reading nook by the front window. I didn't tell her anything. I didn't need to. She didn't ask. We talked about books, the early frost, the stray cat that had taken to sleeping on her porch. It was the most normal I'd felt in weeks. Before I left, I bought the poetry collection. I also bought a journal, a nice one, hardbound, with creamy pages that invited thoughts too soft for speaking aloud. When I got home, Walter was in the den. He looked up, surprised to see me holding a shopping bag. You went out, he said. I did, I replied, setting the bag on the counter. To the bookstore. He looked like he wanted to say more, but he didn't. Just nodded and returned his eyes to the television. We had become polite strangers in our own house, orbiting each other like two planets that had long since cooled. That night, I lit a candle and sat at the kitchen table with my new journal. I didn't try to write a story. I just wrote feelings, fragments, questions, hopes I hadn't dared to say aloud in years. I want to travel alone, I wrote. Just once. I want to wake up somewhere I've never been and not make coffee for anyone but myself. I want to stop apologizing for needing space. And I want to paint again. Paint. That word came from somewhere deep. I had almost forgotten that I used to love it. Before Daniel was born. Before mortgage payments and casseroles and night shifts at the school. I used to sit in the garage with a canvas propped up on a stool and lose myself in color. Where had that version of me gone? The next morning, I went looking for her. I dug through the attic and found the old wooden box with my brushes. Most were stiff and worn, but I didn't care. I found an old easel, dusted it off, and set it up in the sunroom. I opened a window, let the fresh air in, and began painting again. Not because I was good at it, but because I needed to remember who I was when no one was watching. Over the next few weeks, little pieces of me returned. I started walking every morning. I made soup from scratch. I pulled out old letters from my mother and read them slowly, letting her wisdom wrap around me like a shawl. I even signed up to teach a watercolor class at the library once a week. Just a small group of older women, mostly widows, a few divorcees, and one incredibly cheerful woman named Doris, who wore neon scarves and said exactly what she thought. They didn't care about my past. They just liked my paintings. And for the first time in years, I liked them too. Walter noticed, of course. He saw the changes. Some nights he'd try to talk to me, ask about my day, mention how quiet the house felt, but I gave him no promises. I wasn't cruel, but I wasn't soft either. One evening, he stood in the doorway of the sunroom, watching me paint. You seem happier, he said. I didn't look up. I'm getting to know myself again. He nodded slowly. I hope I can do the same. I let his words sit there, unanswered. Because this part of the story, this healing, this rebuilding, it wasn't about him. It was about me. Lately, the house feels smaller, perhaps, because I'm reclaiming the spaces that once belonged solely to my memories. The den isn't my refuge anymore. The guest room isn't just where I escaped, it's where I woke up. In these confined halls, silence speaks volumes. And every evening, when Walter doesn't speak, it feels like another word unsaid tilts our world further. I caught him watching me the other day, from across the hallway. I was in the kitchen, brushing crumbs off the table after making a batch of cookies, spiced pumpkin, Daniel's favorite. He leaned in the doorway, shoulders slightly slumped, and watched me without asking what I was doing or why. I said nothing. He cleared his throat softly. "Mom used to make those," he said, voice low. For a moment, I almost told him they were for me, that I made them to feel a fragment of the past without the ache of expectation. But instead, I offered a small smile. "Would you like one?" He nodded, and I slid the plate across to him, feeling a quiet warmth in the exchange, even if it wasn't enough to remind me of the way things used to be. At night, I keep to myself in my sunroom, turned studio. The lamps glow softly, painting the pages of my journal with golden light while rain taps gently at the windows. I scribble in those pages. I'm not seeking revenge. I'm seeking peace. That has become my mantra lately. Walter and I live under the same roof, sharing meals and space, but not dreams anymore. I suspect he doesn't sleep well, he doesn't move much when he thinks I'm asleep, and I've heard that familiar catch in his breath. Each morning, he pretends nothing happened, sets the coffee pot while I wipe the steam off the kettle. We share a look over our mugs. I look away first. My gardener's hands are healing. My soul is lighter, but I know I must soon decide what comes next. This isn't about proving a point. It's about choosing a life that aligns with the person I'm rediscovering. One evening, after weeks of this quiet tension, I found myself walking toward him, step by hesitant step. I stopped outside the den, where he sat watching the nightly news. He didn't see me, so I cleared my throat softly. "Walter." He nodded without looking my way. I hesitated, the words lingering. "I was thinking, we should talk." He turned his gaze searching, weary. It wasn't the same man who shocked me weeks ago. He looked older, regretful. I sat beside him, careful of the distance between us. "I don't know where we go from here," I said. His voice cracked when he replied. "I'm sorry," he said again. "Every day." I studied his face. The man I married, the partner of my life's joys and heartbreaks. The betrayal hangs heavy, but it also bears the history of years spent side by side. "I'm not sure I can ever believe in us the same way," I admitted. He nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. "I know. That night, we didn't promise anything. We hardly spoke. I left the den with no harsher words between us. Instead, there was something sturdier, more honest in the air. The next morning, I found a note in the kitchen, by the coffee pot, in Walter's steady handwriting. "I can't blame you for wanting more. I'll figure this out. I will not stand in your way." It felt like forgiveness, though I didn't fully trust it. But I didn't brush it away. I left it on the table, and I read it again when the dawn broke. Something inside me softened, not back toward him, but toward clarity. My journal pages are filling up now. They hold sketches of pumpkins and roses, fragments of letters I'm not sure I'll send, lists of places I'd like to go. "Paris," I scribbled one morning. Just once, to sit at a cafe and write with no one waiting. This, I realize, is where love transforms. Not when it is easy, not when betrayal doesn't happen, but when it becomes a quiet conversation, hand in hand with the truth. Maybe our story doesn't end the way I once planned. Maybe love doesn't only survive through forgiveness. Maybe the greatest act of love is letting go with dignity. I still bake cookies. I still paint. I still listen to the rain tapping on my windows. And most importantly, I'm still here. I made the decision quietly, the way most meaningful things in life begin. There wasn't a dramatic speech, no slammed doors or packed suitcases in the night. It started with an envelope, a pale blue one, tucked into the mailbox between a gardening catalog and a utility bill. Inside was a flyer for a painting retreat in Vermont. It was one of those local brochures sent to every address in the state, probably destined for the recycling bin. But this one, with its watercolor trees and quiet lake on the cover, made me pause. 3 nights, all meals included. Bring only your brushes and your brave heart. That last line made me laugh. Brave heart. At 65, who even thought of bravery in terms of painting? But something stirred in me. That evening, I spread the flyer out on the kitchen table. Walter noticed, of course, but he didn't ask questions. We had settled into a strange sort of rhythm, cordial, quiet, respectful. Not quite strangers. Not quite married in the way we once were. Just two people who had lived a long time, side by side, and now no longer knew how to finish each other's sentences. "I'm thinking of going," I said aloud, not looking at him. He looked up from his crossword. "You should." That was all he said, but it wasn't laced with sarcasm or guilt. It was simple, and somehow that made it easier to book the ticket. Vermont in November is a place of stillness and fire. The trees blaze orange and red before giving in to bare branches. The air smells of pine and wood smoke, and the sky feels closer somehow, like it's leaning down to listen. The retreat center was small, a converted farmhouse surrounded by fields and a lake that mirrored the hills. There were only 8 of us in the group, all women, most older than me. One had just turned 75 and still wore bright yellow rain boots and red lipstick. Her name was Ruby, and she told stories about her ex-husbands like they were characters in a novel. The first morning, we gathered in a sunlit room that smelled faintly of turpentine and old paper. Each of us chose a canvas and an easel. The instructor, a soft-spoken woman named Elise, told us not to worry about technique. "Paint what you feel," she said, "not what you see." I didn't know what I felt, not exactly. But I dipped my brush into a soft green and began with a single curved line, then another, then a bloom of pale red. I painted not roses, but the idea of roses, not a garden, but the memory of one. My hand moved slowly at first, then with more freedom, more trust. It was like finding a forgotten song I used to hum under my breath. During lunch, Ruby asked me why I had come. I shrugged. Needed to get away. Needed to remember who I was. She nodded, sipping her soup. A woman remembering herself is a powerful thing. Those 3 days felt like opening a window after a long winter. I walked alone by the lake at dawn, wrapped in a wool shawl, watching fog roll across the water like silk. I sat beside a fireplace at night, trading laughter and secrets with women who had lived through wars, divorces, widowhood, and more. One had lost her daughter. Another had finally come out after 60 years. All of them had stories, and in their stories I saw pieces of myself. On the last evening, we each shared one painting. I held up mine, a blend of blues and rusted gold, with a single figure standing in a garden with no fence. "No fence," Elise said gently. "Tell us why." I smiled. "Because she doesn't need one anymore." When I returned to Davenport, everything looked the same, but I had changed. The walls of my home didn't feel as close. The quiet didn't press down so heavy. Even Walter noticed. "You look different," he said, "lighter." "Maybe I am," I said. We sat on the porch together that evening. He poured us each a glass of tea, the way he used to when things were good. But I didn't mistake that for reconciliation. This wasn't about going back. "I don't know if I'll stay here forever," I said softly, watching the sky turn pink over the trees. Walter nodded. "You don't owe me that." "I don't want to hurt you," I added truthfully. "You already did," he said, not unkindly. "But not the way you think. You hurt me by reminding me what it means to live with intention. I forgot how to do that. You didn't." We didn't speak after that for a while. But it wasn't awkward. It was honest. For once. That night, I added another page to my journal. I am not waiting anymore. I am walking. Slowly, gently, but forward. And with every step I take, I am leaving behind the woman who once settled for silence. I'm not sure where the path leads yet. Maybe a small apartment near Daniel. Maybe a cottage by the lake. Maybe nowhere far at all, but somewhere wholly mine. But what I do know is this. I am not just healing. I am becoming. It had been nearly 2 months since that October day. The days were shorter now. Shadows came early, blanketing the house by 4 in the afternoon. The quiet in the evenings was still there, but it no longer scared me. It had become something else. A space to think, a space to feel. One Friday morning, Daniel called. "I've got a few days off," he said. "Thought I'd drive up, maybe take you out for lunch." End of quote. "Sounds perfect," I told him, and it was. He arrived just after 10, bringing with him the smell of crisp autumn air and the kind of warmth only a grown child can carry into their childhood home. I hadn't seen him since before the retreat, and when I opened the door, he looked at me with new eyes. "You're glowing," he said, hugging me tightly. "Mom, you look, how different." "I feel different," I said honestly. "Better." We sat at the kitchen table, our hands wrapped around mugs of tea. Walter was out. He'd taken up walking in the mornings, often for hours. I didn't ask where he went. I didn't need to know. Daniel looked around the kitchen, then back at me. "How are you, really?" I took a deep breath. "I found pieces of myself I didn't realize I'd lost." He nodded. "And him?" I knew who he meant. "We talk," I said slowly. "But it's surface level, civil. We're both too polite to push the wounds any deeper, but not close enough to start healing them together." Daniel frowned. "Do you think you'll stay with him?" The question hung in the air like a fog that wouldn't lift. "I don't know," I said. "That's the truth. Some days I look at him and remember all the good things, the laughter, the long drives, the nights we stayed up worrying about you. And then I remember what I saw, what he did. And I wonder how I'll ever feel safe with him again." Daniel nodded, his expression unreadable. "I just want you to be happy." "That's the thing," I said. "I think I finally am. But not because of him, because I'm making choices for me again." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You don't have to stay out of duty." "I know. And you don't have to leave out of pride." That made me pause. I looked at him, my boy, now a man with lines of worry beginning to form at the corners of his eyes. "That's the hardest part," I whispered, "trying to separate what's pride and what's dignity." We sat in silence for a moment. Then he said, "Why don't we take a drive?" So we did. We bundled up and got into his car. He took the long way through the back roads, past the high school, the old diner, the house we rented when he was a baby. I pointed out landmarks as they appeared, like ghosts of my former self. We ended up at a quiet park by the river. The trees were bare, their skeletons reaching toward the gray sky. We walked in silence until we reached a bench. "I used to bring you here when you were small," I said, sitting down. "I remember, I used to feed the ducks. You always shared your sandwich, even the good part." He smiled. "Still do." We sat there for a while, watching the water move slowly under the bridge. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "It's a lease agreement," I said. "There's a small apartment on the edge of town. It has big windows and a view of the woods. I went to see it last week, and..." Daniel turned to me. "So you're leaving?" I didn't answer right away. "I haven't signed it yet," I said, "but I think I will. Not because I hate your father, not even because of what he did, but because I need to know who I am on my own, for the first time in my adult life." Daniel didn't try to change my mind. He didn't ask me to stay or go. He just nodded, then said something I'll never forget. "Then do it, Mom, and do it without looking back." That night, I told Walter. He didn't cry, he didn't beg. He simply sat down at the kitchen table, folded his hands, and asked, "Will you be okay?" "I think I already am," I said. He nodded, tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry I couldn't be better." "I'm sorry too," I said. "But not for leaving, just that it came to this." I moved into the apartment 2 weeks later. It was small, yes, but it felt open. I painted the walls a soft cream and hung my paintings along the hallway. I bought a second-hand armchair for reading and a new kettle just for me. Daniel helped me hang curtains, and Ruby, my wild red lipsticked friend from the retreat, sent a postcard that said, "Freedom looks good on you." She was right. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't grieving. I wasn't even heartbroken. I was beginning. Again. And for the first time in a long time, the future didn't scare me. It called to me. The first morning in my new apartment was quiet, so quiet it almost startled me. No creak of Walter's footsteps, no shuffle of the newspaper being unfolded in the kitchen, no clink of his spoon against the coffee mug, just the hum of the refrigerator, the rustle of trees outside the window, and the steady rhythm of my own breath. I sat on the edge of my new bed, wrapped in an oversized cardigan, feet barely brushing the floor. The sun filtered in through the lace curtains I had picked out myself. No one questioned the pattern, or asked if it matched the furniture. It didn't need to. It matched me. I made coffee. For one, that felt strange. I used to brew a full pot, out of habit. Now, I filled a small French press with just enough for a single cup and waited while it steeped, the smell wrapping around me like a memory and something new at the same time. I took my mug out to the tiny balcony. From there, I could see the tops of bare trees and the roof of the local church just beyond the hill. The town looked different from this angle. Less familiar, less suffocating. For once, I wasn't watching the world from the front porch of a life I had outgrown. I was seeing it from a space entirely mine. That first week was filled with small victories. I rearranged the furniture 3 times until it felt right. I hung my favorite painting, one I had done at the retreat, above the mantel. I unpacked slowly, deliberately, touching each item as if deciding whether it still belonged in this new version of my life. Some things didn't make the cut. I gave away the casserole dishes with chipped edges, the tablecloths that had too many memories woven into them, and even the embroidered pillow Walter's mother had made us for our wedding. Not because I was angry, but because I needed space for who I was becoming. And still, the loneliness crept in. It came not with a roar, but in the quiet moments when I reached for a second mug by instinct, when I turned to make a comment during a television show and remembered no one was there, when I opened the mailbox and found only grocery store coupons and silence. But I welcomed the loneliness. I didn't fight it. I let it sit beside me like an old friend with stories to tell. It reminded me that I was human, that I had given and lost and survived. I started going to the library again, not just as a patron, but as a volunteer. I shelved books, led a small poetry group on Thursdays, and even helped plan a senior arts showcase for the community center. People knew my name but not my story, and that was freeing. One afternoon, while returning a cart of books, a man smiled at me. He looked to be about my age, maybe older. His name was Arthur, and he wore glasses that slid down his nose when he laughed. He complimented the scarf I was wearing and asked if I liked Robert Frost. I told him I did. He said, "Would you like to get coffee sometime?" I paused, not because I wasn't interested, but because it had been decades since anyone had asked me that question, and I realized I wasn't quite sure how to answer. So I said, "Maybe." That night, I wrote in my journal, "Maybe is more than no. Maybe means there is room for possibility." I didn't call Arthur the next day, or the day after, but I thought about him when I passed the bakery window where he said he liked to sit. And for now, that was enough. Daniel visited often. He brought me books and photos of the kids, and once, a plant I promptly overwatered. He seemed relieved to see me thriving. I think, in some part of his heart, he had feared I would break down, that I would become bitter or lost without the life I had known for so long. But I was learning that I didn't have to be broken to be different. Walter called once, just to see how I was doing. "I heard you're teaching painting at the library," he said. "That's wonderful, Evie. I always thought you had a gift." "Thank you," I replied softly. "I'm enjoying it." He paused, then said, "I'm proud of you." It was kind, unexpected, and it didn't sting the way I thought it might. It just landed. Gently. We said goodbye without promises, without reopening old wounds. And I realized, in that moment, that I didn't hate him. I didn't need to. Hate would have tied me to him. Forgiveness not for what he did, but for what I needed to release was what gave me wings. One night, after leading my art class, I walked home in the early snow. My breath curled in the air, and my boots crunched over the fresh powder. The lights in my apartment window glowed warm, waiting for me. I stood outside for a moment, looking up. "I built that," I whispered. "That warmth, that peace. Not Walter, not Lorraine, not even Daniel. Me." I opened the door, stepped inside, and felt something rise in my chest. It wasn't joy. It was sovereignty. And it was mine. It was a Thursday afternoon when the phone rang, an unfamiliar number lighting up the screen. I almost didn't answer. I was elbow deep in flour, trying a new cinnamon roll recipe I found in an old church cookbook. The kitchen smelled of sugar and spice and something close to joy. But something about the timing, the number, the sudden flutter in my chest made me wipe my hands and pick up. "Mrs. Evelyn Carter?" Yes. This is Davenport General Hospital. I'm calling regarding your husband, Mr. Walter Carter. I stood completely still. He had what we believe to be a minor stroke this morning. He's stable now, conscious. He gave us your name and number as next of kin. The world went quiet, except for the sound of my heartbeat in my ears. I hadn't expected this. I hadn't prepared for the way my body still reacted to his name, said in a tone of emergency. Is he? My voice cracked. Is he okay? He's speaking alert. We're keeping him overnight for observation. He asked if you could come by. For a moment, I just stared at the window over the sink, watching a bird hop across the fire escape, oblivious to the shift happening inside me. I'll be there, I said. I changed into something simple, comfortable, neutral. My hands trembled a little as I buttoned my coat. Not because I was afraid, at least not entirely. It was more the uncertainty. The knowing that this visit wasn't about marriage or betrayal or reconciliation. It was about humanity and something deeper still. When I arrived, the nurse led me down a quiet hallway to a small room. The lighting was dim, and Walter was sitting up in bed, an IV in his arm, a blood pressure cuff still wrapped around one bicep. His face looked pale, softer than I remembered, smaller somehow. His eyes lit up when he saw me. Evie. I sat in the chair beside the bed, resting my purse on my lap. They said it was a minor stroke? He nodded slowly. They say I'll recover. Might need physical therapy. Some meds. There was a pause, long and heavy. Thank you for coming, he said. I didn't come for you, I replied gently. I came for the part of me that still honors what we shared. He swallowed hard. That's more than I deserve. We sat there for a while without speaking. Just existing in the same space, something we hadn't done in months. His hands trembled slightly when he reached for his water. I helped him without thinking, guiding the cup to his lips like I had done in younger years, when the flu knocked him flat, or after his surgery in 2003. Old instincts dehard. They said I should have someone stay with me the first few days after I'm discharged, he said. I nodded. You should call Daniel, or maybe your brother. They both live too far. And, he looked away, I don't want to burden you. Then don't, I said. Ask properly. He looked at me again, truly looked. Would you consider staying a few days? Just until I'm steady on my feet. I sat back, breathing in slowly. This wasn't a romantic plea. There was no manipulative undertone. Just a man once my husband, now weak and scared and asking for help. I'll think about it, I said. And I did. That night, I returned to my apartment and sat by the window, the cinnamon rolls untouched on the counter. I watched as lights blinked on in the buildings around me, one by one, like quiet heartbeats in the dark. What is duty, really? What is compassion, when bound to history? I thought about the woman I had become, independent, strong, rebuilding. I thought about the man Walter once was, the one who held my hand during childbirth, who danced with me in the kitchen, who cried when his father died. I also thought about the man who broke my trust, who crossed a line that could never be fully erased. But this wasn't about love. Not anymore. This was about grace. Not for him, necessarily, but for me. For who I wanted to be, not in the eyes of others, but in my own quiet heart. The next morning, I packed a small bag, a change of clothes, my toothbrush, a book of poetry. I knocked gently on his hospital room door, then stepped in. I'll stay, I said, but only as long as you need help. His eyes filled. He didn't reach for my hand, didn't try to thank me too much. He just nodded, and I could see the relief pour over him like warm water. The following days were simple. I helped him dress, made soft food, managed his meds. We spoke only when needed. I slept on the couch, wrote in my journal each night, and reminded myself daily, I am not going backwards. I am choosing kindness with boundaries. On the third night, Walter looked at me over a bowl of soup and said, You still make the best carrot ginger I've ever had. I smiled faintly. It's the only thing I never overcooked. He chuckled, just a small laugh, but real. There was warmth in that kitchen. Not romance, not reunion, just peace. When I left on the 5th morning, he walked me to the door, slow but steady. Thank you, he said, for treating me like a person, even when I didn't deserve it. I met his gaze. That's not for you. That's who I am. I stepped out into the cold morning air, the sun low on the horizon. I pulled my coat tighter, my heart strangely light. I had visited the past, faced it, healed a little more, and walked away again. Still standing. Still me. A few weeks after Walter's stroke, after I'd returned to my apartment and found the rhythm of solitude again, something curious began to take root in my thoughts. A postcard, not from Ruby this time, though she sent plenty. No, this one came from a place I had once dreamed of in my 20s, but tucked away behind wedding rings, grocery lists, and PTA meetings. Santa Fe. The colors on the card leapt off the paper: terracotta reds, sun-drenched yellows, cerulean skies that looked almost unreal. It came from Elise, my painting instructor at the Vermont retreat. "There's a 2-week art residency opening here in spring," she wrote. "Not formal, just space, light, and time. You came alive in Vermont. I think you'd bloom here." I stared at the card for a long time. Santa Fe. It sounded like a foreign planet to someone like me, raised on meatloaf, snow boots, and Midwest practicality. But something in me stirred, a soft but steady hum that whispered, "Why not?" That evening, I pulled out my notebook, the one I'd nearly filled since October. I flipped back to a page written in the early weeks of separation. It read, "I want to wake up somewhere new, to make coffee for no one but myself. End one." I smiled. Maybe it was time. I called Elise. She was thrilled. "It's nothing fancy," she warned. "Just a guest house on an old ranch property, some local artists who gather once a week, and more sky than you'll know what to do with." "That sounds perfect," I said. The preparations felt oddly natural. I booked the train. Yes, the train, not a flight. I wanted to see the country change outside the window, mile by mile. I packed lightly, a few comfortable dresses, brushes, my favorite journal, and the small watercolor set Ruby had mailed me last Christmas. Before I left, I stopped by the library to drop off a donation of art books. Judith gave me a long hug and slipped a poem by Mary Oliver into my hand. "Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" I didn't need to answer. The train ride was slow and beautiful, each hour peeling away layers of doubt. Cornfields gave way to desert sands, and by the time we pulled into the warm breath of New Mexico, I felt like someone knew, or maybe just someone remembered. The guest house was modest but cozy. Adobe walls, colorful tiles, and an old porch swing that creaked in rhythm with the wind. I met the other residents the next day, a sculptor named Ruth who wore turquoise rings on every finger, a poet named Leo who spoke in metaphors even during breakfast, and a photographer named Miguel who showed me how to catch light on the petals of cactus flowers. There was no schedule, no expectations, just days filled with color, silence, shared meals, and wide-open sky. I painted with abandon, not roses or memories this time, but mesas and shadows, and the way morning light stretched across the valley like a prayer. My hands moved freely, and my mind stopped asking, "What for?" and started saying, "Yes, more." One afternoon, I sat under a cottonwood tree and wrote a letter to Daniel. Not a long one, just enough to say, "I'm happy." Not the loud kind, the deep, steady kind. I thought about Walter too, but I didn't write him. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't feel the need to explain anymore. Some parts of life are meant to be lived, not reported. There was a night, about halfway through my stay, when the group gathered around a bonfire. We roasted corn, passed around a bottle of wine, and talked about things people don't say out loud at home. Ruth asked, "When did you first fall in love with your life again?" I didn't answer right away, but later, lying in bed, I whispered into the dark, "Right now," because it wasn't just the art. It wasn't just Santa Fe. It was the space I had given myself to be new, to be whole, to be Evelyn, not the wife, not the mother, not the betrayed woman, just Evelyn. When the residency ended, I stayed 3 more days. Not to make more art, but to sit, to breathe, to stand at the edge of the canyon and know that I had come this far, on my own, without bitterness, without fear. On the last day, I mailed a postcard to Ruby. It read, "You were right. Freedom does look good on me." And then, I wrote something else. I'm not going home. I'm going forward. I arrived back in Davenport on a rainy afternoon in early spring. The kind of soft, steady rain that feels like a blessing, like the world is being gently reminded to start again. I stood at the edge of the train platform with my bag in one hand and my sketchbook tucked under my arm. A light breeze tugged at my scarf. I hadn't told many people I was coming back, only Daniel. No grand return, no announcements. Just me, showing up in my own time, in my own way. Daniel met me at the station. His car was parked under the dripping awning, and he waved the moment he saw me. When I got in, he hugged me, then leaned back to study my face. "You look like someone who knows something the rest of us don't," he said. I laughed. Maybe I do. We drove through familiar streets that no longer felt like boundaries. The town hadn't changed much, but I had. I saw things differently now. I didn't flinch when we passed the diner Walter and I used to go to. I didn't tighten my chest when I spotted the old church. Instead, I noticed the way the rain made everything shimmer, the way small things still held beauty when you really looked. At Daniel's house, his wife had made soup and biscuits. The kids were running around with sticky fingers and wild energy, and it felt good to be surrounded by noise again just for a little while. After dinner, when the house was quieter and the children were off to bed, Daniel poured us each a cup of tea. "So," he said, "what now?" I sipped my tea slowly, letting the warmth settle in me. "I don't think I want to go back to the apartment," I said. "Not because it wasn't good. It was. But I feel like I've outgrown it now." He nodded, waiting. "I've been thinking about staying in Santa Fe longer," I said. "Not permanently, just part-time." Elise offered me a position helping coordinate retreats, mentoring older women who are just starting to paint. I could teach. I could learn. "That sounds perfect," Daniel said, smiling. "Do you think Dad knows you're back?" I shrugged. "Probably. But I haven't called." Daniel looked thoughtful. "Would you want to see him?" I paused, then shook my head. "Not because I'm angry, just, I think we've said everything there is to say." That night, I stayed in the guest room, the same one I used to read bedtime stories in when Daniel was a boy. I slept deeply, without dreams. The next morning, I went for a walk through the neighborhood. Everything was green and damp and alive. When I passed the community center, I stopped in on a whim. The woman at the front desk recognized me. "Mrs. Carter, we were just talking about you. The Thursday painting group is still going strong, but folks miss your touch." I smiled. "Would there be space for me to run a session or two this month?" Her eyes lit up. "Absolutely. We'd love that." That afternoon, I called Elise. The retreat was life-changing, I told her. "But I think I need to split my time, part Santa Fe, part here. I want to teach again, really teach." She was thrilled. "You've got a way with people, Evelyn. That was clear the moment you picked up a brush." "Ah." I hung up feeling calm. Not exhilarated, not nervous, just certain. And that certainty felt like the strongest foundation I'd ever stood on. The next week, I opened a short series called Second Acts, a painting workshop for women over 50 who had stories to tell and scars to carry. There were 8 of them in the first class. One had just lost her husband. Another was caring for a grandchild full-time. A third had never painted before and cried when she realized she could make color move across canvas like a prayer. After class, a quiet voice called out to me. "Mrs. Carter?" I turned to see Arthur, yes, that Arthur, the man from the library, holding a small wrapped box in one hand. "I heard you were back. I didn't want to intrude, but I saw this in Santa Fe last month. Thought of you." He handed me the box. Inside was a set of handmade brushes wrapped in a ribbon. I looked up, startled. "You've been to Santa Fe?" He smiled. "I went to visit my sister. Fell in love with the sky there." I smiled back. "Me too." There was a pause. A gentle one. "Still up for that coffee?" he asked. I laughed softly. "I think I finally am." That weekend, we went to the small cafe by the river. We talked about books and travel, not the past. And that was the most refreshing part. We were 2 people meeting in the middle of our own journeys, not to fill a void, but to share a little warmth. As I walked home that evening, the setting sun cast long shadows behind me, but my face was lit gold. I was no longer just rebuilding. I was expanding, not into who I was before, but into who I was always meant to become. It started like any other Thursday. The paint-splattered room at the community center buzzed softly with chatter and clinking brushes. I was setting up jars of water and arranging color palettes for the afternoon class when I noticed her. She was standing just inside the door, clutching her purse like it might vanish from her hands. She looked to be in her mid-50s, though life had clearly made her older in spirit. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her lips pressed into a thin line. She was trying not to cry, and doing a poor job of it. I walked over gently. "Hi there," I said. "First time?" She nodded. "Is it okay if I just watch?" "Of course," I said. "But we have extra brushes if you change your mind." She gave me a shaky smile and sat in the back corner. During class, I kept an eye on her. The women painted flowers, landscapes, memories. I guided their hands, encouraged bold color, praised brave mistakes, but my thoughts kept circling back to the woman in the corner. After class, as people packed up and drifted out into the afternoon light, she lingered. "Can I talk to you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Of course. We sat at the side of the room, the scent of acrylics and turpentine still hanging in the air. "I don't know why I came," she said. I saw the flyer, second acts. That phrase wouldn't leave me alone. I nodded, saying nothing. "My name's June," she said. "I've been married 31 years. Last week, I found out he's been cheating. With my best friend. I thought I was losing my mind. My heart clenched, not in pain, but in memory. That wound, that sentence, it echoed. I couldn't breathe," she continued. "I still can't. Everyone says to leave. Everyone says to fight. I don't even know who I am anymore." I reached across the table and took her hand. "I do," I said softly. She blinked at me. "I know exactly who you are. You're a woman who has given too much without asking for anything in return. You're someone who believed love could hold anything. And now you're here still standing even if you feel like you're crumbling." Her lip trembled. "How did you survive it?" I took a deep breath. "I didn't. Not at first. I broke, quietly. I cried over kitchen sinks and in grocery store parking lots. I pretended I was fine when I wasn't. But then, one day, I picked up a brush, and I remembered that I was more than what he did to me." She was crying now. Silently. "I can't paint," she whispered. "You don't have to," I said. "You just have to begin." The next week, she came back. She didn't speak much, but she took a brush. She dipped it in a pale blue and dragged it across the canvas like she was writing a letter in another language. She came again the week after that. And again. She painted slow, quiet things, an open window, a teacup, an empty chair. Each week, her lines grew more confident, her colors more certain. One Thursday, after class, she handed me a small canvas. It was a woman standing in a garden, sunlight behind her. Her back was straight, her shadow was long. "She's not finished," June said. "But I wanted to show you, because she's me, or who I want to be." I touched the edge of the canvas like it might dissolve if I breathed too hard. "She already is you," I said. June smiled. That evening, I walked home under a pink sky, birds wheeling above rooftops. I thought of June. I thought of the other women in the class, each one carrying stories behind their eyes, painting not to impress, but to remember. That night, I wrote in my journal, maybe the purpose of survival is not just to keep breathing, but to reach back and light the path for someone else. Later, I lit a candle and sat by the window. I sipped tea and watched as the flame danced, casting soft shadows across the pages of my notebook. For the first time, I realized I wasn't just living again. I was leading, not loudly, not perfectly, but enough. And maybe, just maybe, that was what healing truly looked like. The idea started as a whisper. One evening, I was flipping through my old journal entries, those early pages filled with raw, hurt, broken phrases, and hesitant dreams when I landed on a sentence I barely remembered writing. Maybe someday I'll hang one of my paintings on a wall where strangers can see it. Maybe it won't be much. Maybe it will just be mine. I stared at that sentence for a long time. Then I picked up the phone and called Judith at the bookstore. "I have a wild thought," I told her. Judith laughed, her voice warm as always. Those are the best kind. What if we did a little exhibit at the store? Nothing grand, just a weekend pop-up. Paintings from the women in my class are stories on canvas. There was a pause. Then she said, yes, 100 times yes, let's do it. From that moment, everything moved like spring runoff, fast and full of life. I brought the idea to the women at class the following Thursday. They stared at me in stunned silence for a moment, until Doris, the one who always wore mismatched earrings and had opinions about everything, grinned and said, finally. I've been waiting for you to suggest something like this. June looked nervous. I don't know if I'm ready. You are, I told her, because it's not about perfection. It's about truth. We called the exhibit Brushstrokes and Second Chances. Judith cleared space in the back of the bookstore, and I worked with Daniel who, bless him, had a friend in printing to create simple flyers. Ruby mailed in 2 paintings from her home in Michigan, along with a cheeky note. Put these near the wine table so people feel bold enough to buy them. Each of us chose 2 or 3 pieces that meant something. Not just pretty scenes, but moments, memories, stories on canvas. June submitted the painting of the woman in the garden. I still haven't painted her face, she said. You don't have to, I replied. We already see her. The opening night was more than I imagined. People came, more than we expected. They walked among the paintings, sipped cider, asked quiet questions. Some cried, some smiled, some stayed long after the room had quieted. One man stood in front of my painting, a soft abstract of wind through wild grass, and whispered, I didn't know grief could look like that. I didn't respond. I just stood beside him and let the silence speak. June sold her first piece that night. Her hands shook as she accepted the payment. I feel like I'm giving away a part of myself. You are, I said. But only the part you've already healed. Doris wore a red hat and greeted everyone like they were at her home. Even Arthur came, and though he didn't say much, he lingered near the table with my name on it and slipped a small note into my coat pocket before he left. Later, I found it. It's not the paint, Evelyn. It's the courage behind it. That night, after everyone left and the lights dimmed, I stood in the middle of that little bookstore and looked around. The walls were covered in color, in pain, in hope, in beginnings. It was never about the art, really. It was about the act, the bravery of it, the decision to say, I am still here, and I still have something to say. When I got home, I lit a candle and poured myself a glass of wine. I sat by the window, watching the lights of town blink in the distance, and let the quiet wash over me like music. In my journal, I wrote, Tonight, I put my heart on a wall, and the world didn't flinch. It leaned in. Maybe this is what it means to begin again, not with a bang, not with a plan, but with a brushstroke. One honest color at a time. It came in an envelope with no return address, just my name, written in familiar cursive, and a Santa Fe postmark. Inside was a letter from Elise. The studio here is expanding, she wrote. We're opening a second location, more community-based. I need someone with heart, with presence. Someone who knows how to build a safe space for women who are just learning how to find their voices. I thought of you first. She didn't pressure. She didn't assume. She simply offered a key. And there it was again, the whisper. Another chance. Another door. For days, I didn't tell anyone. I carried the letter in my coat pocket, feeling the weight of it with every step I took into the bookstore, into the community center, into my quiet apartment. I would reach for it sometimes while waiting for the kettle to boil or while watching birds dance across the sky at sunset. It was tempting. A whole new chapter. A life shaped not by what I had endured, but by what I could create. Arthur noticed something had shifted. We were having coffee at the River Cafe, watching the early spring melt turn the water wild and fast. You're quieter than usual, he said. I smiled. I've been offered something. He waited. A chance to go back to Santa Fe, permanently, help build something there. Arthur nodded slowly. And what does your heart say? That's the thing, I said. It says both. He leaned back, studying me. Do you want me to tell you to stay? No, I said. I want you to tell me the truth. Oh. He sipped his coffee thoughtfully, then looked me in the eye. You belong wherever you feel most like yourself. Not where you're needed, not where you've always been, where you become more. That night, I walked home through the town I had once considered a prison, then a sanctuary, then something in between. I passed the church steps where I once cried, the bookstore that now displayed student artwork in its windows, the sidewalk crack where Daniel once tripped, chasing after an ice cream truck. This town held pieces of me, but I was no longer buried here. I was planted, and plants, I had learned, don't bloom the same way twice. When I got home, I sat at the kitchen table and took out my journal. I drew a line down the center of the page. On one side, I wrote, Santa Fe, warm sun, open skis, women with stories I haven't met yet, a room with windows facing west. On the other side, I wrote, Davenport, my students, June, the Thursday Circle, Arthur. Then, below both columns, I wrote something I hadn't expected. The decision isn't between leaving or staying, it's between silence and song. I closed the journal. I knew what to do. The next morning, I called Elise. Can I do both? I asked. Half the year there? Half here? She laughed, delighted. That's better than I hoped. You'll have to share me with a few Midwestern women who won't let me go entirely, I added. I'd expect nothing less. I met Arthur that afternoon, told him my plan. He smiled, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded brochure. Good, he said, because I was going to ask if you'd ever consider coming with me to Nova Scotia this summer. There's a lighthouse and a tiny little bed and breakfast I've been dreaming of seeing since I retired. I looked at him, surprised. Is that your way of asking me on a trip? It's my way of saying I'd like to see more of the world with you in it. And I didn't answer right away, but I reached across the table and took his hand. And that was enough. Later, I told the women at the community center. They clapped. Doris cried. June hugged me tighter than I thought her arms could. We'll miss you, she said. I'm not leaving, I said. I'm just stretching wider. I looked around the room at the women who once arrived, broken and now painted like they had fire in their bones. I had found something here, but more than that, I had become something here. And now, I would carry that into the world. I'm sitting by the window again. The same window I once watched through in silence, wondering if my life had ended the day I found my husband with someone else, wondering if the best parts of me had already been spent, wasted, or lost. But now, the light feels different. It doesn't hurt anymore. It fills the room like a quiet song, reminding me of everything I've lived through and everything I've yet to do. There was a time I thought betrayal would break me. It didn't. It unmade me, yes, but only so I could become something truer. There was a time I believed I had no choices left, that my path was fixed, that at 65, you're meant to fade quietly into habits and old chairs and the soft hum of television. But I was wrong. You can begin again. You can wake up one day and say, Number, this story isn't over. And you don't need permission to change. You don't need someone to leave first, or apologize, or understand. You just need to listen to the part of you that still wants more and honor her. I've lived many versions of myself. The young bride who hoped, the tired mother who gave, the grieving wife who lost her way, the woman who packed a bag and got on a train, the teacher who made space for other women to find their voice, the painter who spilled her truth onto canvas, the friend who said yes to love again not because she was lonely, but because she had love to give. And now, I am this. A woman with a suitcase by the door, a calendar filled with colors and names, a soul full of movement. I am not trying to prove anything. I am simply living, fully, kindly, honestly. And if you're listening to this, if you've made it this far, I want you to know something. It's not too late for you either. It doesn't matter if you're 65, 70, or 80. It doesn't matter if your hands shake, if your heart is tired, if you haven't been seen in years. You're still here. That means something. That is something. Pick up a brush. Call an old friend. Say no to what drains you. Say yes to what calls your name in the quiet. You don't need to be fearless. You just need to be willing. Willing to sit with the silence. Willing to stretch toward light. Willing to believe that maybe, just maybe, your second act could be the best one yet. And if no one's told you this lately, let me be the first. I'm proud of you, and I hope you're proud of you too. What did you feel while listening to this story all the way through? If it touched your heart, leave the #1 inch the comments. If you didn't feel connected to it, feel free to write 0. Every piece of feedback means a lot to me, because it's thanks to you that I can keep going. It's from your responses that I draw the energy to tell the next chapter. A new story is coming, even deeper, even more moving, and I truly hope you'll be there to listen with me.